And for more, I'm joined tonight by a respected voice in the geopolitics of the Middle East. Trita Parsi is an award-winning author who has written several books on U.S. foreign policy in the region. He's also executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, it's good to have you back on the day. Let's look at what Mr. Pompeo did today. A visit to the occupied Golan Heights and then a visit to an Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank. What was Pompeo trying to do today?
Well, we can only speculate, and I think your reporting has already suggested that this could very much be part of a desire by Pompeo to boost his own bid for 2024 and maybe to be able to boost Trump's second bid. All of those things are valid speculations in my view. What we should not be forgetting, though, is that regardless of their intent, this is going to have real and frankly devastating consequences for the region as well as for U.S. security, because these are measures that is locking in the United States in a posture in the Middle East that makes it increasingly stuck and increasingly complicit in the illegal activities of some of its allies. And this is ultimately bad for the region and ultimately bad for the United States as well, regardless of the intent or the political motivation of Pompeo.
I want you to take a listen to what the Secretary of State said today about Iran.
Indeed, the commitment we've made, the ironclad commitment we've made to the Jewish state will continue. I'm confident that after our conversation this morning, we talked about how we can protect Americans and Israelis in the region from the regime in Tehran. You talked about this. They remain, we should not take for granted, they remain the foremost state sponsor of terrorism in all the world. And Israel has provided outstanding support to our pressure campaign, which we have no intention of relaxing.
So, Trita, how does Pompeo's message square with President-elect Joe Biden's intention to try to revive the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, Pompeo is doing absolutely everything he can to make sure that Biden's options are as limited as possible and that it does not lead to him being able to return to the JCPOA or in any other measure. And I think this is really critical. This is also what he is trying to do when it comes to moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing these settlements, making these visits, because they're counting on the idea that Biden simply does not have enough political courage to reverse some of these policies that he himself deemed to be devastating for U.S. national security, but that he doesn't have what it takes to make sure that there's a pushback against it. Unfortunately, that calculation may be proved true, because when we take a look at what's been happening on the U.S.-Israeli front and the treatment of settlements, there has been a gradual acceptance of illegal settlements as something that the U.S. at first objected to, later on viewed as an obstacle to peace, later on became more neutral towards, to what we have right now, a complete embrace of illegal settlements and violation of international law. And I think in some ways, the Pompeo and Trump administration may have gone too far. They may have pushed it so far that Biden may have no choice to but really push back, even though he will likely pay a political price for doing so.
What do you think it's possible that Joe Biden could stay the course when it comes to accepting Israeli settlements, but really try to do a 180 with the policy on the Iran nuclear deal and try to revive that deal? Could he have both of these things happening at the same time?
He could. I mean, that's likely what's going to happen, because the political cost of reversing the policies on Israel are going to be higher than trying to go back into the nuclear deal. I mean, we should not forget that Democratic platform explicitly says that a Democratic president should be going back into the nuclear deal, and beyond that also negotiate further, having additional negotiations with Iran. There is no such language in terms of settlements, for instance. So I think the political price will be lower on the Iranian front. But I think what's really important to keep in mind here is that Democratic presidents all too often have ended up accepting the limitations and the framework that previous Republican presidents have imposed on them. We saw that as well when it came to how the Obama administration dealt with a lot of the legacies of the Bush administration. And the question is there enough political will to really actually have President Biden define his framework himself and define whatever limitations he has himself, instead of letting him be defined by President Trump or Secretary Pompeo?
Yeah, apropos definition and defining, Pompeo attempted to expand the definition of anti-Semitism today. Take a listen to what he said.
Today, I want to make one announcement with respect to a decision by the State Department that we will regard the global anti-Israel BDS campaign as anti-Semitic. I know this sounds simple to you, Mr. Prime Minister. It seems like a statement of fact, but I want you to know that we will immediately take steps to identify organizations that engage in hateful BDS conduct and withdraw U.S. government support.
Now, Trita, he's also talking about people who want to boycott Israel, not necessarily because they're anti-Semites, but he's saying he wants to consider them as anti-Semites. Is that going to have any legal leg to stand on in the United States?
It's likely going to be challenged by ACLU and a lot of other organizations because this is a freedom of speech issue. I mean, on the one hand, Pompeo is imposing crippling sanctions on Iran that have been devastating for ordinary people, limited their access to medicine in the midst of a pandemic. And on the other hand, he's trying to say that even if individuals on their own voluntary basis decide that they don't want to buy oranges from Israel, then that suddenly turns them into anti-Semites. So there's going to be massive legal challenges to this, I'm confident. But what I think more than anything this shows is that you are now an administration that is just agreeing to whatever Bibi Netanyahu is telling them that they should be doing, because this is just a wish list of everything Bibi Netanyahu has ever wanted. And I think there's very few people anywhere that truly believe that Netanyahu's objective has been peace. And if the United States then is aligning itself with whatever Netanyahu wants and it's not wanting peace, well, that creates a major problem for the United States in the region. It's already been bad enough as it is, but it's going to get even worse going forward, I suspect.
Well, I mean, could this be a trap that that Pompeo or the Trump administration is laying for Democrats that are about to take power, because they can say then, if you're boycotting Israel, then you're an anti-Semite, and that's going to play well with evangelical Christians, for example, in the United States?
Absolutely. I mean, part of the plan here is very much to try to make sure that Republicans are seen as the pro-Israel party in the United States. Netanyahu has long given up on the idea that his closest allies in the United States would be the American Jewish community. The American Jewish community overwhelmingly votes for Democrats. They are overwhelmingly opposed to Donald Trump. They're overwhelmingly in support of the Iran nuclear deal. And they're very, very skeptical, if not opposed to settlements. So those are not his allies. His allies are evangelical Christians who actually have a theological affinity with Israel, one that is somewhat strange at the end of the day, because they envision that Israel needs to get strong in order for Christ to return. But at that moment, anyone who's not a Christian or is not converting to Christianity will be killed. But that is actually a very strong motivating factor for people like Pompeo, who is evangelical and who's been talking about these things quite a lot, at least prior to becoming Secretary of State.
So let me just ask you one more time. What do you think then we saw happening today? Was this early campaigning by Pompeo for president in 2024, or was he doing campaign work for Trump's fight to return to the White House in 2024?
I suspect this has more to do with himself than with Trump. I think this has very much to do with the fact that he wants to be the contender for the Republican nomination in 2024. He has always had an eye on it. And his main competitors are going to be people like Nikki Haley and others who also have a tendency of aligning themselves with Netanyahu. So I think this is an effort by him to give himself a leg up vis-a-vis that competition. The devastation for U.S. national security and the region as a whole is not even a second concern. I don't think it's a concern at all, unfortunately.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, as always, good talking with you. We appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.